the saints are those who, what are the saints? People who received improved bodies, still bodies of flesh, but improved bodies at the beginning of these 1,000 years, at the beginning of the millennial kingdom. Why? Because they remained faithful to Christ in the years after Christ's death. You know that Christ died and resurrected, and those people who remained faithful to Christ, then they received the reward, which is the improved bodies. And what does it mean to have an improved body? The bodies probably, most certainly, did not need to defecate and urinate. So to go to the toilet. So you would not need what we do every day. We have to defecate and urinate because that's how our system works, which means that we are inferior bodies. And this explains the total lack of sanitation in the buildings at that time. If you analyze, and this is no secret, if you analyze the architecture of the huge, gigantic buildings everywhere in the world, what we call the buildings of Tartaria, which is the Christ Millennial Kingdom, they have no sanitation in the buildings, no restrooms, no toilets, nothing. It doesn't make any sense because today all of our public buildings and everywhere we go, we need toilets because we have to defecate and urinate several times a day. And for such intricate, huge architecture and buildings, and then there's no sanitation, is remarkable. And this is why, because during these 1,000 years, give or take, the Millennial Kingdom, the evil forces were temporarily confined, and improved bodies, because they were faithful to Christ, means that they did not have the need to defecate and urinate. And their life support, the way they would live, would be thanks to the ether, because everything was connected to the ether, which is the atmospheric energy. Now, we know, as history will be, of course, completely falsified, because now we know that the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages are artificially added, those 1,000 years added, and they serve to mask the Millennial Kingdom. That's why they say, oh, humanity for 1,000 years was in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, and they didn't do anything, just to mask the Millennial Kingdom. And then, of course, whenever we see the J and the I, which means to Jesus or Jesus, they say, oh, it's just a one. But they put the J and the Y because that's the way. It's a lie, because for example, in years when we have, for example, 501, the 1 in the 501 is a 1, is a number 1, but the thing in front of 501 is a J or an I. And you can clearly see the difference between a J and an I and the 1 in all the numbers. It's very clear. It was not Tartaria. We call it Tartaria, but it was actually the Millennial Kingdom of Jesus Christ. Now, you see, we have the historical facts. We see the year numbers on coins, maps, and tombstones and buildings, where we see the I and the J in front of the 3 digits. Those would represent the year in Christ's Millennial Kingdom. So that means that we need to dive into the biblical texts, the correct translations, and consider the facts that are given there. It could mean then that the tribulation and the end time prophecies brought out in the Bible, book of Revelation, they took place in the past, before the beginning of Christ's millennial kingdom, just like the second coming of Christ. So the absolute wealth of cathedrals and huge, gigantic buildings and architecture in this world we see today would then be evidence of this millennial kingdom of Jesus Christ, which ended totally somewhere between the 16th and the 19th century. So the process of ending, it was not like an abrupt ending. It was from the 1500s all the way to the 1800s. And in the 1800s, starting with Napoleon, was the brutal finish with what we call the mud floods and the revolutions and the destructions by fire. And that ended the so-called 1,000 years millennial kingdom. When you say 1,000 years, it's not exactly 1,000. It's a millennium calculated like that. Of course, with the great catastrophes and kind of reset that ended in the 1800s, but it was prolonged all the way from the 1600s to the 1900s. That's why the Renaissance in the 1500s and etc. So there is evidence that of course, the quality of construction and the building materials that they used in the past was way better and much more advanced than it is today. That's nothing new. We all know it, and it's often impossible to understand how the ancestors of people who were more primitive than us because they were walking the streets, according to history, by horse and carriage in the early 19th century, yet their ancestors built these huge megalithic buildings and structures with such perfection, blah, blah. You know the drill. You've seen history and manufactured and such beautiful architecture. Now, we now understand this whole thing about the evidence that a reset occurred, because we've seen the wildly popular mud flood research. It's called mud flood research, which states that in the first half of the 19th century, so from the 1800s to the 1850s, a world mud flood happened. The so-called world Tartarian civilization, which we have to call the Christ millennial kingdom to be more accurate, was reset at the time. The reset was for 300 years, but it came to an end in the 1800s with brutal reset. And we see the buildings of this civilization of the Christ millennial kingdom are mostly intact, but the lower floors of these buildings are buried under thick layers of mud everywhere in the world. In many buildings, you can see this by the road that runs right to the floor, and the cellars that then seem to emerge are mostly only part of what is still underneath in some cases. And you see this everywhere in the world, in all countries. Sometimes we only see the top portion of the building, and there's even laws in place, criminal laws, that they forbid to dig, to make diggings, to dig to see what's underneath the surface of the earth. It's forbidden by law. It is forbidden by law. It's not like they don't do it because they're lazy. No, it's actually forbidden by law to make excavations. Now, there are rumors that, of course, not rumors, facts, that something strange happened in the 18th and 19th century. So in the 1700s and 1800s, also when the dates with 1776 in America, 1789 in France, and the people who were present in the cities in those times, they didn't belong to those cities. Because the actual end of the Millennial Kingdom was in the 1500s, as we call it. So the people who were left were living in those cities, but they were not natives of those cities, and they rediscovered the cities. That's why we see the Piranesi things when they arrived in the 1600s, 1700s, and everything was in ruin. And of course, the big cities were built in the time of the Christ millennial reign. And we also know about the many orphan trains and orphans and lots of children and kids all of a sudden, no adults. They were used for work when they started with the so-called Industrial Revolution and stuff in the 1800s, and the children had no adults, which it could mean various things, like the clones, or they were separated from the adults. The many emerging also very scary madhouses and asylums raised suspicion, because it means that the people who were alive after the Millennial Kingdom ended, and they knew the whole story and the whole history of humanity, and they refused to deny the story, then probably they were forced into these madhouses, and this was the beginning of the demonization of these so-called psychotic people. They called them crazy people, and probably the children were separated from the adults, and the children were indoctrinated with the new system, right? That's why we have so many children in the 1800s with no parents, and of course these children are our great grandfathers, right? So for example, the grandfathers and mothers of my parents were born in the second half of the 1800s, right? So, and they have no recalling, they don't remember their childhood. So as you can see, we are just the people who came. As they multiplied, they mixed together, they had kids, and their kids had kids, and that's how we came around in the 20th century. And how do you, of course, the thing with the asylums, how do you deal with people who are left after the kingdom ended, and they're alive, and they know the truth, and they don't want to accept the new order? So you put them in asylums and in crazy houses. Now, the many saints, we call them saints, depicted in... This is going to be too much for you, I guess. It's not too much for me anymore. It would have been too much for me back some time ago, but now I understand, because I know all the pieces of the puzzle of history, and now everything makes sense. The saints, which are depicted in the ancient images and pictures, may also be the evidence of Christ's millennial kingdom. The saints are those who... What are the saints? People who received improved bodies, still bodies of flesh, but improved bodies at the beginning of these 1,000 years, at the beginning of the millennial kingdom. Why? Because they remained faithful to Christ in the years after Christ's death. We know that Christ died and resurrected, and those people who remained faithful to Christ, then they received the reward, which is the improved bodies. And what does it mean to have an improved body? The bodies probably, most certainly, did not need to defecate and urinate. So to go to the toilet. So you would not need what we do every day. We have to defecate and urinate because that's how our system works, which means that we are inferior bodies. And this explains the total lack of sanitation in the buildings at that time. If you analyze, and this is no secret, if you analyze the architecture of the huge, gigantic buildings everywhere in the world, what we call the buildings of Tartaria, which is the Christ Millennial Kingdom, they have no sanitation in the buildings, no restrooms, no toilets, nothing. It doesn't make any sense because today all of our public buildings and everywhere we go, we need toilets because we have to defecate and urinate several times a day. And for such intricate, huge architecture and buildings, and then there's no sanitation, is remarkable. And this is why, because during these 1,000 years, give or take, the Millennial Kingdom, the evil forces were temporarily confined, and improved bodies, because they were faithful to Christ, means that they did not have the need to defecate and urinate. And their life support, the way they would live, would be thanks to the ether, because everything was connected to the ether, which is the atmospheric energy. Now, we know, as history will be, of course, completely falsified, because now we know that the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages are artificially added, those 1,000 years added, and they serve to mask the Millennial Kingdom. That's why they say, oh, humanity for 1,000 years was in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, and they didn't do anything, just to mask the Millennial Kingdom. And then, of course, whenever we see the J and the I, which means to Jesus or Jesus, they say, oh, it's just a one. But they put the J and the Y because that's the way. It's a lie, because for example, in years when we have, for example, 501, the 1 in the 501 is a 1, is a number 1, but the thing in front of 501 is a J or an I. And you can clearly see the difference between a J and an I and the 1 in all the numbers. It's very clear. Now, we also know that in a time of only lies that we live today, because we are being deceived, which means that we would be now in the time after the Millennial Kingdom, according to biblical text, which is the time when Satan, the bad guy, Lucifer, and the other evil forces were let loose for a while, which is the short period after the Millennial Kingdom, before the final judgment takes place. So we live this short period between the end of the Millennial Kingdom and the beginning of the final judgment, which explains the rise of materialism in the world from the 19th century onward. As you can see, from the 1800s, people only care about materialism, money, wealth, power, and stuff. So we are living in the deception ages, which started aggressively from the 1800s. Because as we know, according to the text, Satan, the one called the deceiver, is the father of lies. These are the words of Christ himself. The father of lies is Satan, and he deceives the nations of the earth. It also means, and this is something that for the big majority of people is too much to digest, but that's not my problem. It means that by the rest of the dead in Revelation chapter 20, verses 4 and 5, the rest of the dead, right? The rest of the dead people, that we are the souls who died before the 7th millennium, or the souls who did not choose Christ. And it's okay. I mean, I'm not surprised, being a soul that has not chosen Christ. So I'm one of the souls that has not chosen Christ before the 7th millennium. And that after the Millennial Kingdom, after the Millennial Kingdom was ended, we participated in the second resurrection. The second resurrection, in which we were most likely incarnated in new imperfect bodies that have to defecate and urinate. And we are now given a chance in this short period, the little season, which started in the 1800s, which is presumably about a few hundred years. So usually they say it's about a quarter of a millennium. So it's 250 years. If we take the 1800s, the beginning of the 1800s as a start point, it would be until the second part of this century, 2050. So we are incarnated, the resurrection of the rest of the dead, into these imperfect bodies, and are given the chance in this short period to purify ourselves of evil and still choose Christ, still get a chance to choose Christ until the final judgment takes place, which could be any time. And it makes sense if you study the Bibles which were written before the 1800s, when in the 1800s all the translations were messed up, but there's still some texts and Bibles that were alive at the beginning of the 1800s that are totally awesome when you read them, and they make perfect sense. And so the final judgment, according to all these things, would be the split, or the part of humanity that has not learned. So speaking about, now that we know about Nikola Tesla and the portals and time travel and the electromagnetic portals, then the part of humanity that has not learned anything, has not accepted the truth, is moved to the negative world, which is what is represented by the New World Order. And then there's a part of humanity which is lukewarm, which is like not evil but not good enough, which would enter a new cycle to try again, so a different timeline, which is what some of these people online, they call the reincarnations and stuff. And then there's the part that has learned and accepted the truth and is in Christ, and it's moved to a positive world, a positive timeline, with considering that everything is magnetic, and where they live eternally in the mind of Christ. And this is very important, because even in the movies we see all this thing with the different timelines and how you can jump from one timeline to another, and it makes sense now, because now we understand everything is electromagnetic ether, and the timelines we now understand with everything we've seen with Trump and Nikola Tesla and etc., which I've explained in past videos. So this has nothing to do with how many Christians live on, how do you think as a Christian. This just involves the feelings, the thoughts, and the actions that you make and you take, and considering the fact that now we know we have all the evidence of the past, and we are alive now, and these imperfect bodies which have to defecate and urinate. And that's the whole thing about imperfect bodies. It's not that you're like super awesome in other ways, which can also be possible. It means that if you're perfect, you don't have to go to the toilet, so you don't have to defecate and urinate. And if you're imperfect, you have to defecate and urinate, and that's the whole thing. And which means that we, at some point, if we consider the fact of the souls and stuff, then we have not chosen Christ in the past. So that's why we live in this period of the short period after the millennium and before the final judgment. And this is the reason why even in the movies we see all this thing about, so popular, about the different timelines. So the timeline where the earth is a disaster, timeline where the earth is still like in lukewarm, so like keep on learning, and a timeline where everything is paradise, right? Awesome stuff when you understand everything is ether and electromagnetic energies. So yeah, see you in the next video. Let's continue with the giants. Now everything makes sense. First of all, just some slow motion, continuing from the previous photos, which I left at 33, 34, 35. Look at the size of those windows. 36. Look at the size of the human, of the man, and the size of the windows beside the doors. Now we understand. I had to speak more about the chronology and the years added, oh man, everything makes so much sense now. 36, 37. Look at Philadelphia City Hall in the USA. 38. Oh, by the gods, and more than 7,000 years of history of our human species. Boston. Look at the size of those. Look at the doors and the windows. Look, technology, carry. Horse and buggy. Oh man. Okay, 40. Oh man, feels like even spooky in a way. You know, if it wasn't for the fact that now we know that it was the millennium of Jesus Christ, J and I in front of the monuments, on the stones and the coins and everything else. J Jesus, J Jesus, as the J in German is like the I, and then everything was changed. And if it wasn't for this, I would feel like so spooked right now and so afraid. But now that I understand, look at this amazing stuff when you're inside of these buildings and you feel such like a tiny nothing. Keleti railway station, the size of those bricks, man. And there's no construction photos. By the creation of humanity, Imagine, these are like in the millennium of Christ. What was before the millennium of Christ in the ancient world? Which was the story. Look at this. So now picture 44. The size of the door. The whole door. And we only need like we need like a third. Pretty much a third. Like no, let's say a third. A third of the actual door to go inside. He always has a question, why so many big entrances and doors and windows? And of course, like these, for example, they look so natural. Martin van Buren, Bates, and Anna Swan. More, 49. Oh man. A skeleton of a human being has been discovered in Tennessee, in the USA. A giant, weighing 1,500 pounds. The frame must have been 20 feet in height and weighed 3,000 pounds. 20 feet in height. 20 feet. Our average height is 6 to 7 feet. 6-7 feet. This guy is like more than triple. 20 feet. Tennessee against the world. 16 feet high. The Grand Monster, Tennessean. Recently discovered in Williamson County by W.J. whatever. While digging a well. Typical. You dig a well, a road, a house, a basement, whatever. A cemetery. On the top of a hill. Some 100 feet high, at the depth of 50 feet below the surface. 50 feet below the surface. Entombed in a large rock, apparently in a horizontal position, resembles the human more than any other skeleton. This monster skeleton of the antediluvian age, before the flood, before will be exhibited at the theater this day from 9 o'clock a.m. until 5 p.m. In consequence of the liberality of the legislator, His Majesty will be exhibited to the citizens of Nashville at 30 cents. Children and servants, half price. And back in the day, they would make these discoveries while digging, and then they would use it for like as an attraction, like circus and museum, and just to make money from the visitors. Now, how do you feel when you enter the primitive home of peasants and people that are not from your same DNA? Well, same DNA, but not at height. Kind of like feels, I understand. Imagine like seeing these people walking around. Imagine how you would feel. You would feel out of place, totally. And then you see the buildings everywhere, all across the world, across the oceans, and people still laugh at this. So many, even Christians laugh at this. Christians should be the people who should embrace this more than anyone else. When we speak about the 7,000 years history and the book of Enoch and the giants and what we call Tartaria, but it's not Tartaria, and the whole 1,000 years added as the Dark Ages, and then the period between 1500 and 1800 when the whole world was just in ruins and nothing happened, and then the 1800s when everything was in fire, and then we came along in the 1800s. So amazing. You're inside these places and people visit and they say, oh, it's a place to say prayers and to go to God's home, like a church or cathedral. How can you be so? Why can't you just see? Like, if you didn't show them what's left of the old world, you would say, okay, they have no reason to believe because you can't show them. But then you show them and they still say, no, you're the bad one, you're the one who's not right. Look at this. You just, like, the entrances and the gateways, they leave you flat on the ground of amazement. How impressive they are. But you look at the windows and you compare our average height. You see that this is even like a human being here. So this is like your average adult man. Look at the window. Like, why do you need windows so big? Because obviously it was a different human species. And makes sense because everything was connected to the ether, electromagnetic energy, atmospheric energy. So everything, plants, animals, and humans are bigger when there's an interconnection with the ether, which the connection is not there anymore because the ether is there, but the technology to use the ether is not there anymore. So look at this. I mean, how can you say that this was built by horses and wooden wheel buggies and carriages and the primitive technology. And they say, oh, everything was built across the world because people were religious. Oh, man. Do you understand now the importance of the millennium of Jesus Christ? And you have the J or the I. And in German, the letter J is pronounced like the I. The word yes in German is written J-A, but you say ja. The word Jesus, therefore, is read Jesus. 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 Even though it's written with a J. Now do you understand the importance of the German Empire and other empires as well in the millennium of Christ? Because it was people of many different colors of the skin and different cultures, but everything was the millennium of Jesus Christ. That's why it's written in the text that this generation shall not pass before my coming, said Christ. Man, and when you escape this whole thing about religion and boring stuff, everything makes so much sense. So look at this. This, and look at the buildings and the statues and the quality. And this is made with like proper technology. I don't even know what's more. Like there's several of these pictures that this is one of them. This is one of them that blows me away. Then this one blows me away as well because you see I can't even say how big they were, like triple size. And then of course, when I see these big buildings, I'm speechless. This blows me away as well. This one blows me away, definitely. And then there's like these extracts of papers where you see, they literally say, I mean, the people were not dumb, right? They would write papers saying, hey, we discovered this. We were digging a well or a road or a house or whatever. And we discovered this. And they were skeletons, which means that they were dead a long time ago. Okay, so I'm just going to end the video with this. Because it makes me feel, no, this one you might say, oh, it was built because they wanted to put statues inside. Okay, no problem. Or this one, let's compare. Let's leave this one. Yeah, I like this one. It makes me feel dumb and weak. I'm sorry. I want to give it the emphasis it deserves. Now we know, and we're gonna know more. Let's do this quietly, and then we're going to talk. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh boy, oh boy. 11, 12, 13, 14. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Skeletons, 12 feet. 15. Not largest skeleton ever found. 1919. Oh yeah, this was 15. 16. 1919. This is our time. Giant skeleton, 18 feet tall by the gods. 17. 18. Look at the door. 19. Look at the door, the entrance. 20. I know some of them are AI CGI, right? But it's the message that counts here. 21, 22, 23, 24. I wonder why some doors and windows in some of the old buildings were so big. 25, 26, 27. I wonder why in the old world buildings some of the doors and windows were so big. We have to speak about the millennium of Jesus Christ. Everything was with a J and an I. 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. Wow, look at that. Amazing. Now, let's go back to this here. Well, first of all, these doors here. I just wonder why the old world buildings, and by the way, the millennium of Christ, of Jesus, Jesus, well, that's with an I or a J, because in German you read the J like an I. ended in the 1400s, more or less. So between what we call the 1400s discovery of America, blah blah, until the 1800s, there's those 300 years of the world in ruins, not enough people. The whole thing where the Renaissance comes and they say, oh, these are our buildings, we built them. All these societies get formed. And then in the 1800s, the catastrophe happens with Napoleon and all that stuff, and the comet and the nuclear winter and lots of explosions in the world, and the cities get destroyed, which were empty. So for 300 years, from the 1400s to the 1800s, nothing happened, just the world in ruins. Then in the 1800s, massive destruction. And then from the 1850s, industrial revolution, repopulation, there's some leftovers of the giants here and there. And then all of a sudden the 1900s start, and the First World War and the Second World War, and what happened in Russia and Germany and stuff. History is very recent. More recent than I was expecting, considering that my parents met their grandparents who were born in the 1800s. Amazing stuff. Now, prehistoric giants, it says here. This was something from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Lots of these things are in the archives of history. Workmen find many who were evidently left on a battlefield of centuries ago. A battlefield of centuries ago. Skeletons of a race of giants who average 12 feet in height were found today by workmen engaged upon a drainage project near Crowville, near here. There are several scores at least of skeletons, and they lie in various positions. It is believed they were killed in a prehistoric fight. Why does it have to be a prehistoric? And that the bodies lay there where they fell, blah blah. Wonderful discovery. Great excitement among the workmen. The largest skeleton ever found. The exhumation of an antediluvian. By the way, the flood happened more recently than we were told. And there were several floods, by the way. Look at this. Friday, July 11, 1919, just after the First World War. Giant skeleton, 18 feet tall, Austin, Texas. If the report that the fossilized skeleton of a giant 18 feet tall has been found near Seymour, Texas is true, it is the most important ethnological discovery ever made in the world, remarked Dr. J.E. Pierce, professor of anthropology of the University of Texas. It would break all previous records of giants by nearly 10 feet. The tallest man known to anthropological research was only 8 feet inches in height. The skeleton in possession, blah blah. And there's so many of these articles and books of the 1800s, and of course we have the Smithsonian, and we have all these things of when you go through the world, even today, they said no, you're not allowed to make excavations because you have to preserve. And my question is, preserve what? It's just dirt and land and earth and insects and nothing else. And there's places like in the deserts and in the jungles and in the forests and say, no, you're not allowed to dig. So if we dig several meters, sometimes you dig a couple of meters or 3 meters and you find lots of things, and you find empty cities which were buried, and you find skeletons of 8 feet and 10 feet and 12 feet and 15 feet and 20 feet tall. And then I say, and we look at all these old world buildings with an absolutely amazing architecture, and now we know about the millennium of Jesus Christ. So this means that, because now we know about the ether and electromagnetic forces, and when living beings are surrounded and interconnected with the atmospheric etheric energy, everything is bigger. Plants are bigger, animals are bigger, therefore human beings are bigger and taller and stronger. Which means that Jesus Christ was also bigger. And by the way, we have now the whole the coins and the monuments with a J and an I in front, and now we know that 1,000 years was added in history, and what they called the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, is actually the millennium, which we don't know if it's a millennium of 1,000 years, or was it like 800, or it was more than 1,000. That is too much for me to understand, way too much. Of course, I understand that the photos, some of them are CGI AI, but that's the best I can do, because imagine being in the 1800s, 1900s, and you discover these things, how many road works and so many men working in the field, and they just find all these things, and they just have these agents coming to you and say, this is ours. And that's even I saw some stories about men who are working. I mean, you have to put yourself in context. Primitive men, they just work, labor, and then they found this, and of course they advise the authorities, and all of a sudden they come with the trucks, they load everything in, and they take it away. And you shut up. And this happened in the 1800s and in the 1900s. Now, I must say, when I see big doors, I feel impact in my brain, in my knowledge, in my soul, and in my existence. And I am totally impacted when I see, when I get to understand the difference in height. And especially when you see the old world buildings with doors and entrances, and even a window makes us adults today look ridiculous. The windows make us look ridiculous. The doors, I'm not even going to say anything, because the doors makes us look like tiny, you know what. But I like it when I finally understand history, geography, and geopolitics, military. Indeed. According to the Bible, the biblical texts, there will be a time, which has already passed, when Jesus Christ returns to earth to wage war against Satan, or the bad guy. After that, Satan will be locked below earth, and the kingdom of Christ will reign for 1,000 years. The typical story, if you went to church, which is called the millennium. After 1,000 years, Satan will one more time be unleashed to the whole world and deceive all nations for a short time. After these strange days of deception, we'll have the final judgment, and finally there will be a new heaven and a new earth. And this is the type of thing that Christians wait for. Now, Christians differ on when the things will happen, but all of them say the same thing. It's going to happen in the future. So yeah, you have to just sit in your corner and wait for Jesus Christ to return. Well, the millennium has already happened. The millennium was the Middle Ages. That's why they're called the Middle Ages and Dark Ages, because people want you to believe that those 1,000 years were the Dark Ages. The millennium, which so many people think that's going to come in the future, has already happened, and we are now living the end of the short time of what is called Satan's rule, or the bad guy's rule, the age of deception, which started in the late 1700s, and it ends now. Actually, it ended already, because with President Trump, who is not president, but Trump, and you understand, and we are living the last moments, the last days of the age of deception, the last years, which is actually cool. It's amazing. Finally, I understand. Of course, this is something that the big majority of people will not accept, because they're just gonna hate you forever. Now, the millennialism, the millennial age is based on Bible verses in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verses 1 to 10. I'm just going to read this. I'm going to read it in plain English, although a deeper study has to be made via the electronic sword application, but it's good for now. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand, and he laid... sorry, just a moment. And he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he threw him into the abyss, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he would not deceive the nations, any longer, until the 1,000 years were completed. After these things, he must be released for a short time. Imagine, amazing stuff, isn't it? Now, Then I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast of his image, and had not received the mark on their forehead and on their hand, and they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who has a part in the first resurrection. Over these, the second death has no power. Impressive. But they will be priests of God and of Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison, which was back in the late 1800s with the French and American Revolution. I'm not sure if it was the late 1700s or like before that. Or if it was in the, probably was in the late 1400s, when it started with the whole thing about the Renaissance and the discovery of America, and that's when maybe the short period started when, with the discovery of America in the late 1400s all the way to today. That's also a possibility, because the Middle Ages are also put between the 5th and the 15th century. Now, when the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore, and they came up on the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they will be tormented day and night forever. Now, regarding the if you go by the book of Revelation, there is no more evidence for any of these theories than the stuff that you can read there. All models assume that the millennium is in the future, but that's just an assumption, because if once you drop the assumption, the new doors of what's the reality of the real world and the historical facts and the geography and the geopolitics open, because from the standpoint view of the author who writes the book of Revelation, the events described therein are in the future, but that's when he wrote the book. But that future already happened, which is what we call the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. Now, the evidence, and one of the biggest evidence which all Christians and all historians do not want to accept, even though it impacts your face every day, the timeline that has been faked to conceal the kingdom of Jesus Christ. That's why they call it the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, which is exactly 1,000 years, which is put between the 5th century and the 15th century. That's why it's very accurate to state that the end of the kingdom of Jesus Christ was in the 1400s with the discovery of America and stuff. So the short period has lasted pretty much for 5 centuries, since the 1400s to now the beginning of the 21st century, which we are living the last days. And you can see it in geopolitics. Now, there is plenty of evidence in history, if you study history from a perspective of reality and anti-hypocrisy, where from the year 1000 onwards, dates were given as J and the number, or I as the number. So for example, J 200, or I 500, or J 600, or I or J 700. So from the year 1000 onwards, which means that refers to the year of Jesus, or the year of Jesus, right? Jesus with an I. Year of Jesus 200, year of Jesus 500, year of Jesus 600. So this is also a possibility. If after the year 1000, and the year 1000 is true, then for example, if we have I or J 800, it would mean 800 years of the reign of Jesus Christ, right? Later, these were altered, and all the history books, instead of the I or the J, have the 1. So instead of 200, it says, instead of J or I 200, it says 1200. Instead of like J or I 500, it says 1500. So the non-existent 1,000 years were added to our timeline, to our history, to deceive us and to hide the kingdom of Jesus Christ, the chosen one, the Son of the Almighty, right? Which has been so much altered. Why? To deceive the nations. And this is why historians can barely figure out what happened in those first 1,000 years. And they say, oh, for 1,000 years, humanity just stood still, right? Or they just give these different ages of, we don't know. It's just like stories for children. they actually don't. They actually say a lot about what happened before 1,000 years of the reign of Christ and what happened afterwards. But those 1,000 years are just oblivious, dark history. And you can see it even in this video. That you have plenty more if you search for historical facts. The I and J in front of the 3-digit numbers on the stone buildings. That's not just put there because of mere ornament. That means in the kingdom of Jesus Christ, how many years have passed? And during the Middle Ages, the world was divided into kingdoms that ruled by divine right. That's why in history, when we were children, and they took it out of context. They said, the corrupt monarchs, they said that they have to rule by divine right, and they were corrupt. No. That's the made-up history. They have the divine right because it was the kingdom of Jesus Christ. So, of course, you had governors and kings and princes who, given the divine right in the kingdom of Jesus Christ, would rule in all the different nations. So, it's easy once you study the whole maps, which are also not studied in school. You see the fake history of all the countries in the world and the continents, and you see how in the 1800s. That's why I'm saying that from the 1700s with the revolutions and stuff, to the 1800s, all the maps all of a sudden were new maps. So everything that we had until that point was. They said, it's just BS, and they started with the new maps. For example, Africa and Asia, many of the parts of Africa and Asia, they all seem to be, the new age of colonialism, and they explore and they find out for the first time. Why? Because the kingdom of Jesus Christ has ended, and the new humanity, which is the primitive humanity we are part of, started the short age, right? The book of Revelation has to be understood in a different perspective, in the perspective of reality and geography and geopolitics. It says, one of the verses, then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key of the abyss. So this is in the Revelation, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan. We call the devil Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. So John, who we say he's the writer of Revelation, he calls him the dragon, the serpent, the devil and Satan, so that there is no doubt as to the identity of the prisoner. And we all know about why. Do you understand now why people talk in conspiracy type of things and all these years in the internet? The reptilians. Well, that's why the seed of the serpent are the reptilians, and this is the thing that we have to understand. So it's just so amazing once you escape from this whole mumbo jumbo in the jungle, mental diarrhea that has been formed because of the false prophets. Now. There's this reptilian presence underground, right below our feet in subterranean caverns. There's also these stories about trade with the subterranean people. What does a reptilian mean? Reptilian means that you have the DNA of your body is more reptilian. We also have reptilian DNA in our bodies, but we are more mammals than reptilians. So there's people. That's why there's people with lots of feelings, lots of emotions. Those people are the DNA with more mammal DNA, which is like what we would call the divine, right? And then there's people with more reptilian DNA, with less emotions, with more like instinct of the reptilian, which is called the dragon or the serpent. So it's all about the content of your DNA. That's why in the books it says the kingdom of God is within you. And the reptilians are not part of that. And this is why Tartaria, what we call Tartaria, which was Scythia, which is supposed to be from Hyperborea, the descendants of the paradise. The crest of Tartaria is a white man, a white knight, white, the color of purity and good, destroying a reptilian. Destroying like a reptilian dragon or like a reptilian beast, right? So it's the fight between the divine people, which have the mammal DNA, versus the reptilian DNA. People tried in the past to do business with the subterranean people, and I mean, in many cases, the entrances to many of these subterranean places were sealed, and even today, the government has sealed entrances, which actually there's even laws about not going inside there. We have ancient sculptures, statues, and carvings of dragons and serpents, and that's not something that has been invented. It has been there for like many years. We have stories that we call now legends and mythology, and Of course, the verses in the Bible, once you read them accordingly and without the bad explanations, they explain everything. Why did the serpent people, the subterranean people, disappear? But because they were locked into the abyss below the earth. You see that this is, even the text says, and he threw him into the abyss. What does the abyss mean? Underground, in the subterranean, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he would not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were completed. After these things, he must be released for a short time. So they were sealed underground, and the people on the surface of the earth, which is what we call the empire, what we now know as Tartaria, flourished, and it was free energy and free everything and free awesomeness and stuff. And that's why, according to this, and now that we know about Tartaria and Scythia and Hyperborea, the age of deception began around the 1700s, specifically speaking, 1776 with the American Revolution, when the whole world started to collapse, and that's why we have afterwards the 1800s, and now you know. So even like in the 1700s, you had these IJ 700, right, which means in the kingdom of Jesus, or Yesus 700, and afterwards it's all up until the late 1700s, which means that going 1,000 years into the past, the kingdom of Jesus Christ started somewhere in the 600s, 700s, right? Maybe even 500s, who knows? It says, as we know now, because of history, because of recent record history, there was a worldwide bloodbath caused by revolutions, which started, the French Revolution and stuff, and afterwards all across those 150 years, and even like the 20th century. So what were these revolutions? In school, they teach us that the revolutions of the 1700s and 1800s and 1900s is the peasants who rose up against feudalism and against royalty and against oppression. We are taught that the royals were evil. And this is important. Why do they always say, oh, the royals are so bad, the monarchy? Yeah, the bad ones are the ones which infiltrated the nations after the fall, after the end of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. But the true reality is that the 1800s, or the end of the 1700s and the 1800s, marked the end of the rule by divine right in the kingdom of Jesus Christ. Of course, in the kingdom of Jesus Christ, you had fair princes and kings who ruled by divine right, because it was the kingdom of the millennium. So, because of the end of the kingdom, then we started the shortage of deception. So now we know that in the 1800s we have the mud floods, the resets, the empty cities, the orphan trains, the destruction of the cities by fires, and all the weird stuff and all the stuff that we see, the old world buildings. And now we understand why. So and we started as a human species as well. So the ones that we are now living, it's amazing, right? We're living now the end of the short age. So. This is the time that the one we call the serpent of old, what we call Satan or the devil, was set loose to deceive the nations. And it all makes sense now, and everything is history, geopolitics, and geography. The beautiful architecture that we know of the old world buildings during the reign of Christ was being repurposed, as you know. Many of them were destroyed or burned down, and the devil, the serpent, which was released, was building his kingdom with the architecture which is pathetically inferior, and the antenna-like spires and the old world buildings of using free atmospheric energy quit harvesting free energy, which is the ether. And we always assume that the whole thing about the mark of the beast was about the future. Oh, the future. And that's how they keep humanity dumbed down. But these events have happened long ago, and also the whole stuff about what happened with our humanity in the 1800s, how dumb and inferior we were. We see the pictures. So for 1,000 years, royal families said that they had the divine right to rule. The divine right to rule was not limited to Christian nations. Do you understand? So in the kingdom of Christ, for example, the Chinese emperor ruled by decree from heaven. The first Japanese emperor said to have been sent from heaven. African royalty, to this day, they still believe that they still have the divine right to rule, despite the appearance of their countries being democracies. So we can trace the kingdoms, the royals, the castles, everything happened in these 1,000 years. Remember, the 1,000 years, even in the times of the so-called Tartaria, it was no obligation. If you didn't like it, That's why I think it says something like you're going to die cursed at 100 years, because you were allowed the free will to not like the kingdom of Christ, which means that you would just die because there's no place for you, right? So it was free will, and not everybody was a Christian kingdom, but everything was ruled in peace and in the kingdom of those 1,000 years. And this is like the stuff that they say afterwards. I like the verse. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. That's amazing. So this is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who has a part in the first resurrection. Over these, the second death has no power. Dead people who were resurrected after the 1,000 years, right? Maybe that's us. So blessed are those who actually lived the 1,000 years. And we've now been in an almost constant state of war for the last pretty much 250 years, since the 1700s. The great deceiver has been ruling the earth and the nations of the world. And this is what explains why people nowadays are so confused and they have no clue about their history. The British intelligence operative George Orwell, as you know, in his book in 1948, he actually said, and this is recorded history, every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. He said this in 1948. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. So this is because they falsified everything about the kingdom of Christ, and that's the age of the deceiver. Of course, we all know that in this age of deception, we have the fake news, the fake history, the fake science, the fake food, the fake medicine, the fake everything. And this whole thing about now we're living the last days, and we can see it, the presidency of what we call Trump, and the fall of the left, the political left, the radical left. And we are now ending, actually we already started, according to the presidency of Trump, the golden age, which means that we are either living the last moments of the short time of the deceiver, or the time has already ended and the reconstruction has begun. So yeah, I know that the big majority of people will not like this, and if you speak this in the churches, you're going to be hated. It's normal because people are brainwashed. That's just the way it is. But for those of you who understand the reality of the real world, and who understand geography and history and geopolitics, now you know the whole truth. Give me a like if you like this video, and we can speak more about this, because there's so plenty of information. I just realized how ignorant I am for not speaking about this earlier, because these things have come around on the surface for many years now, but I was just lazy and ignorant. So yeah, see you in the next video.
And swear by my name, like they taught my people of Israel to swear by Baal. If they do not obey, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation. They're all listed in this prophecy written 3,000 years ago by the prophet Asaph. Asaph was a worship leader for King David, but we're also told he was a seer or prophet. 2 Chronicles 29, verse 30. And he, at a time when Israel was, had one, as the Arab peoples had, over the diaspora, had gone into the promised land of Israel. It was called Palestine in 135 AD. It was renamed Palestine. Never was really a country. It was always loosely defined borders, depending on whoever controlled the area. But it was called Palestine, and then in 1948, it became Israel. And so he was saying, I'm going to pluck out the evil neighbors from what is now going to be called Israel, put them back into their ancient homelands. And I'm going to pluck the Jews out who were living in some of those Arab countries there, lands, and bring them back into what is now going to be called Israel. So we saw that happen in 1948. Now, what he had to do, the Ottoman Empire had controlled the Middle East from 1517 to 1917. There could be no Arab states or Israel with them having control over that area. So in World War I, they got defeated, the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. And all of a sudden we find in the 20th century, the Arabs starting to get their states back. So for instance, Egypt was 1922, got its statehood. Saudi Arabia and Iraq were 1932. Iran, formerly Persia, was called Iran in 1935. Lebanon 1943, Jordan and Syria 1946, and then along comes Israel 1948. So we see that they're all listed in this prophecy written 3,000 years ago by the prophet Asaph. The Arab states got their statehood. This is a sovereign act of God. He said he would put them back into their lands. I'll continue to read these verses and show you how that plays out.
Yeah, now,
Yeah.
Yeah. And so did Trump. Trump's dead months ago.
Really?
Hmm. That is a doppelganger you're seeing running around. Because now what you have and what you're looking at is a bunch of mask wearing people, right? Or, I mean, the real Biden's dead.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so did Trump. Trump's dead months ago.
Really?
Hmm. That is a doppelganger you're seeing running around because the family is making too much money on rallies. That's what the family has said directly. Because as they make the wrong decision against the restoration of the planet and humanity as a whole, they somehow disappear. So they're given a choice and then they're removed. So now what you have and what you're looking at is a bunch of mask wearing people, right? Or, I mean, the real Biden's dead.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so did Trump. Trump's dead months ago.
Really?
Hmm. That is a doppelganger you're seeing running around because the family is making too much money on rallies. That's what the family has said directly. So you have a lot of leaders out there that are not the same persons. People all of a sudden lose 30 pounds in a day, right? They show up the next day and yeah, Putin's not Putin anymore. I mean, a lot of these people aren't who they are.
But at the end of the day, I believe the real Trump will prevail. And what's happening, though, is that the secret space force has to reach a deal with the Chinese to make this happen. And the Chinese are asking for a lot of the technology that the secret space force has been keeping to itself, such as anti-gravity and supposedly mid-beds and other things available in exchange for new financing. And this is what's holding it back. But I believe when that deal is reached, we'll see an end to this short, fake Trump who's, doing nothing but provoking people and putting out incredible lies and passing a bill that would hand over control of the U.S. government to AI. I mean, it's all just obvious nonsense. The only good thing I can say about it is that it's got to the point where they can't hide it, and it's on all the media, not just what used to be called the alternative media, which is now actually the mainstream media. But to conclude, at the end of the day, I believe the real Trump will take charge. Right now, this group and the U.S. Space Force has backed off the regime in Washington, D.C. because they know it's about to implode. It brings out to the mainstream what I've been saying for a long time, which is that there are two Trumps, they contradict each other, they're controlled by different factions, and it's not real. But there's going to be more of this public repeating of the same old garbage day in, day out until real progress is made. So I hate to say this, but a lot of the news these days you should probably ignore. Suddenly, the real Trump disappeared and the fake Trump sort of came up with this big, beautiful bill that would instantly increase the U.S. deficit by another $5 trillion. And if you look at the details, it also basically puts an artificial intelligence in charge of the U.S. government. I mean, that's this is getting really weird. And this prompted Elon Musk to put out a kill Bill, kill the bill type of tweet. And it led to a huge fight with the fake Trump, which led to Elon Musk even dropping the kind of Trump nuclear bomb about how the reason they don't release the Epstein files is because Trump is in them. Like I've said before, they do have videos of the fake Trump doing all this kind of stuff. Now, I've been told from before that Elon Musk is a spokesman avatar for the National Reconnaissance Organization, and he's also supported by the P3 Freemasons. So it looks like these P3 Freemason types have broken with the Chabad Lubavitch Start World War III types, and this is what we're seeing with this Musk thing and this Trump thing. The avatar of King Charles came to the Canadian Parliament and basically said that Canada is terra nullius, which according to international law means anyone can claim it. So the complex negotiations are taking place behind the scenes, and we expect them to continue. But at the end of the day, Russia is going to take over Western Europe, and this is not. I'm just describing the world as it's actually happening. Not trying to editorialize, but just explaining the reality. But it's important to remember that the United States has been a rogue nation controlled by a cult that wants to kill 90% of humanity. They've been responsible for tens of millions of deaths since the end of World War II. They've been caught spreading diseases and murdering children in industrial quantities. This is all proven now. And constant warfare. And these people who were involved are fighting for their lives because they know they are mass murdering war criminals, starting with Zelensky, or should I say the people who use the actor Zelensky as their front, and going right down through the gamut. It's all going to happen. All right, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you again next week.
To Doge just for a second. Earlier, the subcommittee headed by Chairman Marjorie Taylor Greene, her and her staff discovered $2.7 trillion in improper payments to Medicare, Medicaid, overseas, to people who should not have gotten it. Some of this room might have missed that press conference. Can you elaborate on what the president is thinking at this point?
Well, again, that's another example. There's a very long list of the fraud, waste, and abuse that Doge is identifying on a daily basis. Elon Musk also talked about yesterday about Social Security payments that are going out the door for people who are no longer with us. Unfortunately, I would say that is certainly fraud. There's also a lot of contracts they've identified that, just as a hypothetical example, are $1 million, but only 500,000 went out the door. So where's the rest of that cash? And so that's the thing. Those are the things that Doge is working on every single day. And I would just remind everybody in this room, this is what President Trump campaigned on doing. He's delivering on a promise that 70.
Jesus Christ lived obscurely for most of his life and never traveled far. He was maligned and rejected by many, though he had done no wrong. And yet billions of people now follow his teaching and find in him the guiding light for their lives. I am one of them because Christ's example helps me see the value of doing small things with great love